The Legends of King Arthur. The Fall of Camelot. Illustrated by Mike Phillips. Chapter 1. King Arthur paced anxiously. His knights sat in silence at the round table, awaiting their orders. News that Guinevere had been kidnapped by King Maleagant, a supposed ally of Arthur's, had spread through Camelot like wildfire. How could this have happened? Lancelot demanded. Like Arthur, he was unable to sit still. I don't know, Arthur said, his frustration growing. Kay and his men were outnumbered. But dash enough, Arthur snapped. When Maleagant's men approached them in the woods, Kay had no reason to expect betrayal. Lancelot clenched his jaw. Arthur was right. Maleagant's desire for Guinevere had been clear to everyone when he visited Camelot a few days ago, but no one had thought he would go this far. Arthur continued in a low voice, I am just thankful that Kay managed to make it back to tell us what happened before he. Lancelot understood his king's despair. Without Merlin, Kay's future was uncertain. I will lead the rescue party, Your Majesty, Lancelot announced. He knew it was not his place to say so, but he could not help himself. Not when Guinevere was in danger. Arthur met Lancelot's gaze. We will lead it, he corrected. Looking around the serious faces at the round table, he added, half of our knights will remain here. The other half will travel with Lancelot and myself. He turned to Gawain, sitting beside his two younger brothers, Sir Agravain and Sir Gaheris. Gawain, you and your brothers will stay here with Mordred, Bedivere and Griflet. You will protect Camelot and command those left behind? The knights bowed their heads in acknowledgement. We leave now. There is no time to lose, Arthur announced. Then he strode from the chamber. We will find her, Bors assured Lancelot as they rode out of Camelot. I pray you are right, Lancelot replied. Bors was the only person Lancelot had told about his love for Guinevere. Lancelot had confided it all to him one night, when Bors had mentioned seeing them together following Galahad's death. Queen Guinevere had appeared to be comforting Lancelot after his son had died. Surprisingly, Bors had not condemned Lancelot for his feelings. He had also kept the knowledge to himself, for which Lancelot would be eternally grateful. For Queen Guinevere! Arthur shouted from the head of their procession, raising his gauntlet fist in the air. For Queen Guinevere, his men echoed as they marched in pursuit of King Maleagant. 2 days later, they reached Maleagant's castle, a tall, imposing fortress that left no doubt that this was where Guinevere was imprisoned. Arthur gave instructions to hide their approach. There is no use trying to storm the castle, he explained, under the cover of trees. We do not have the numbers to pierce their defenses by force, and a siege would last too long. We need them to open the gates by choice so that we can get inside and find Guinevere? But how? Asked Bors. We will send a messenger, said Arthur. Once he is allowed inside, he will open the gate for us. I volunteer, said Lancelot, instantly. Arthur took Lancelot aside to speak to him privately. We will come to your aid the moment they take you inside the castle. You must act quickly to overcome the guards and open the gate ready for us. Guinevere is all that matters. There is no one I trust more than you to help me save her. Lancelot nodded, feeling the familiar pang of guilt he always felt when Arthur said things like this. They waited only long enough for the setting sun to give the rest of the men more cover in the shadowy hills. Then Lancelot rode forwards with his message. 2 guards met him outside the gate. Lancelot was not dressed as a knight, but as a messenger. He wore simple armor under a tunic with King Arthur's 3-crown emblem on it. He carried a sword, but he made it seem as if he did not know how to use it. He fumbled to unbuckle it from his waist when ordered. In the end he dropped it and the guards laughed. Look at this one of them cried. the best Camelot has to offer, no doubt. Lancelot found himself pushed roughly through the gate before it dropped shut behind him. There were more guards inside than had been visible when they'd planned this trick. One of them looked at Lancelot strangely. "Isn't he?" Before the man could finish speaking, Lancelot burst into action. He punched the guard closest to him, kicked dirt into the eyes of the next, retrieved his sword and sliced at a third. By the time he was done, men lay scattered around the courtyard, but few were seriously injured. Lancelot knew that they would soon be on their feet again with more on the way. Quickly, he seized the pulley and tried to wrench the castle gate back up. It was too heavy. "You!" He pointed his sword at the man who had recognized him earlier. He now had a gash across his temple. "Pull the other chain." The guard was only young, and scrambled to obey. By the time they had opened the gate, Arthur and the other knights were surging through it. More of Meleagant's men arrived to meet them. Lancelot pulled off his tunic so that he would not be recognized immediately as one of Arthur's men. Whilst the enemy focused on the invading knights on horseback, Lancelot threatened the same young guard as before. "Take me to Queen Guinevere or you will die here." Swallowing anxiously, the guard nodded. He led Lancelot towards the castle, against the tide of soldiers streaming towards the courtyard. Lancelot kept his sword hidden, but pressed it against the guard's back. They went up a spiral staircase. At the top, 2 more guards stood outside a heavy wooden door. There was no point in pretending now. Lancelot knocked his prisoner unconscious and lunged at the guards. He killed them both. Next, Lancelot knelt and unhooked a set of keys from the belt of one of the dead men. He inserted one at a time into the lock, whilst the sound of fighting grew louder, came closer. He knew that it would not be long before reinforcements came to guard Guinevere. Finally, the lock clicked. One of the keys had worked. Kicking the door open, Lancelot saw Guinevere cowering in the corner, a look of terror on her face. "Lancelot," she cried. Lancelot ran to her, forgetting his duty as he embraced her. A touching reunion. Releasing Guinevere, Lancelot spun round. King Meleagant was standing in the doorway, sword in hand. He was older than Lancelot and overweight. He would be all too easy to defeat. Lancelot only wished that Meleagant might live longer so that he could make him pay for what he had done. Furiously, Lancelot swung his sword at Meleagant, Guinevere's sobs driving him on. Soon the other man began to tire and Lancelot, spotting an opening, drove his sword into his heart. Meleagant was dead before he hit the ground. Returning to Guinevere, Lancelot embraced her once more. "You're safe now," he whispered as she clung to him. "You're safe." Chapter 2. The joy of Guinevere's safe rescue was overshadowed by the news that greeted them upon their return to Camelot. Kay was dead. In the days following his brother's funeral, Arthur withdrew from his knights and his wife, spending each day alone in his chamber. For many months now he had been too busy to spend much time with Guinevere, but this was worse. Finding herself even more alone than before, Guinevere struggled to return to normal life after her kidnapping. She was always uneasy, as if someone might be hiding around every corner just waiting to take her away again. Most nights she lay awake, listening to the noises of the castle, too afraid to sleep. One day, as Guinevere made her way to the courtyard for some fresh air, she was glad to see Lancelot. At the sight of him, her heart felt lighter and she smiled for the first time in days. Lancelot returned her smile and bowed. "Good day, Your Majesty." "Good day, Lancelot. May I ask where you are going?" "I am on my way to train the new recruits," he replied. "Perhaps I could join you some of the way," she suggested hopefully. She was desperately in need of someone to talk to. Her lady's maid, Rowena, was good at her job, but she did like to gossip. Guinevere felt unable to confide in her about such sensitive feelings. Lancelot's smile widened. "Of course, Your Majesty. It would be my honor." Walking side by side, with Rowena following at a distance, neither of them was in any rush to reach their destination. For the first time since her kidnapping, Guinevere felt safe. "How have you been these last few days?" Lancelot asked, glancing her way. Guinevere hesitated. It would be so easy to pretend that everything was the same. That she was the same. But looking into Lancelot's eyes, she knew that she could not lie to him. She told him everything that had happened during her kidnapping, and her fears since. "I was so scared," she concluded, wiping away a tear. "I still am." Whilst Guinevere had poured her heart out to him, Lancelot had listened in silence. Inside, his emotions were not so quiet. He hated to hear her talk this way. He wanted nothing more than to hold her and tell her everything would get better. But he didn't. He couldn't. Instead, he promised, "No one will ever make you feel like that again. You are safe here in Camelot, Your Majesty. Trust me." "I do trust you, Lancelot," she said sincerely. "And I thank you for rescuing me." Lancelot struggled not to let his feelings show. "Any knight would have done the same," he said gruffly. He stopped when they reached the path that led to the training ground. "This is where I must leave you." "Very well. Thank you for listening." He bowed. "It was my pleasure, Your Majesty. I hope you will begin to feel better." "I'm sure I will." The next few days continued like this. Guinevere and Lancelot would seek each other out, and they would spend as long as possible talking. Guinevere did indeed begin to feel more like herself again. Eventually, however, so did King Arthur. As Arthur's interest in life at Camelot returned, Lancelot and Guinevere suddenly found themselves spending less time together. Guinevere felt the loss of Lancelot's company deeply and found herself longing to be with him, even though she knew that she should not. She believed that Lancelot felt the same way. She often caught him looking at her, though he would turn away as soon as their eyes met. "Friends, we suffered a great loss," Arthur announced one evening as everyone had sat down to feast. "Kay's death cast a shadow over Camelot, but every cloud must pass. Kay will never be forgotten, and tonight we will celebrate the life of a brave and honorable knight, a good friend and brother." A cheer went up as those gathered banged their cups on the tables. Guinevere, sitting beside Arthur, glanced at Lancelot. She was pleased when he returned her smile. "But we have another reason to celebrate," Arthur continued. He placed a hand on Guinevere's shoulder. "Guinevere is back amongst us, and I for one could not be happier, or more grateful to Lancelot for rescuing her." Another rousing cheer went up. Guinevere's gaze met Lancelot's once more, only this time neither of them smiled. Later that night, Lancelot escaped the festivities. Leaning against the wall outside the doors of the great hall, with the hum of celebration in the background, he thought of Guinevere. Her kidnapping had rekindled every feeling he had tried for years to ignore, and spending so much time with her since had only made them stronger. Lancelot looked up as the doors behind him opened. Guinevere stepped out. "Your Majesty," he greeted her. "I saw you leave. Are you unwell?" Lancelot smiled at her concern. "I am fine. Just a headache." "Perhaps a walk would help," she suggested. "Perhaps it would?" He stepped forwards, offering her his arm as they set off down the hallway. "It seems so long since we have walked together," Guinevere said suddenly as they turned down an empty corridor. "I have missed you." Her words pierced Lancelot's heart. He wanted to tell her how much he had missed her too. How much he hated them being apart. He wanted to confess his love. But how could he? Lancelot. Guinevere paused, looking away. What is it? Guinevere turned back to him. I must confess, my feelings towards you have deepened. I. Lancelot could hardly breathe. Guinevere's eyes